Okay, now we're shifting from dummy coding to unweighted effects coding. So I begin with just demonstrating what these codes look like. And you'll see I have to construct these. And you'll see exactly what happens here. Now you'll see 1, 2, and 3 as opposed to cat, fish, and pig. To be just a little bit clearer, I'm just going to eliminate the original variable and just focus on this and then give you a contrast. Contrast not being the code, but here what we have is effects coding right here highlighted versus dummy coded. Now here's the difference, is you'll notice that I had cat as the base. Now I could create cat as the base, but in this case I just created dog as the base comparison. And in dummy coding, what would happen if I had dog as the comparison is all of these would be 0. In this case, the comparison is dog, so it always gets a -1. So the first, for effects coding, the first effects code, which this will be E1, because this is the variable E. E1 will be cat versus dog. E2 will be fish versus dog, and E3 will be pig versus dog. So you still get the comparison, but you'll notice that the values or the levels of our categorical or nominal level variable, where they do not meet the criteria for either the comparison or the focal group, they get zeros. So the interesting part about effects coding is that effects coding allows us to make the same type of comparisons that we had in dummy coding, but if you'll recall, every time we interpret these effects, the interpretation of the effects always has to be in consideration of 0. So the beauty of dummy coding is it's always a means comparison, whereas in effects coding it is going to be a difference, but it's going to be a difference that, as we talk about later, you'll see how the difference is computed and interpreted. So in summary, how they differ: dummy codes produce contrast between each level and a base level. So in this case, it's the base level for dummy code here is cat, but I showed you that you can change it to dog or whatever, and the mechanics of the interpretation remain the same, but the B's that you produce from the linear models change, and they're going to change based upon the comparison. So in contrast, effects codes produce contrast between the levels, but the 0 is implied between the contrasts. Okay, thus 0 is explicit in dummy codes. 0 gets assigned to the comparison group, and it's implicit in effects codes. So you'll see this in the interpretation of the effects as I go through them. Now the next video is going to be fairly lengthy because effects coding can be complicated. So I'm going to start with a very simple example, and then I'm going to go back to my cat, fish, pig, dog example because it turns out to be a little bit more complicated than meets the eye. So stay tuned for the next video.